debate over Iran's uranium enrichment has erupted into a wider geopolitical confrontation, with Russia and China openly backing Tehran's position and rejecting Washington's push for zero enrichment as talks over Iran's nuclear program and regional security hang in the balance. In Beijing, Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov framed Iran's nuclear activity as a question of sovereign rights and international law, arguing that civilian enrichment is permitted when tied to peaceful purposes and carried out under safeguards. Standing alongside Chinese counterparts after a round of meetings, Lavrov positioned Moscow and Beijing as defenders of what they call a rules-based international order grounded in existing treaties, not shifting political demands. He said, asterisk, and the law, the international law clearly stipulates that each and every country is fully entitled to the enrichment of uranium for exclusively peaceful purposes, asterisk, Tates, which has insisted that any revived arrangement must eliminate Iran's enrichment inside the country, remove its stockpile, and impose strict verification measures designed to prevent any path to weaponization. The clash is not merely technical. It goes to the heart of what each side thinks the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty allows, how trust can be rebuilt after years of ruptured agreements, and who gets to set the red lines. He said, asterisk, and never, not anywhere, not a single time has Iran attempted to broaden these peaceful objectives into any kind of ambiguous interpretations and thereby try to use its technologies for military purposes. There is no evidence in Iran. That assertion has been repeated often in Moscow's messaging that inspectors have not produced conclusive proof of a weapons program based on diverted declared nuclear material. Lavrov leaned on the long-standing role of the International Atomic Energy Agency, suggesting that the inspection regime, when allowed to operate, remains a legitimate mechanism for resolving disputes rather than unilateral demands backed by pressure at sea. He said, and the IAEA, no, not once, despite Iran being the most thoroughly inspected country under the IAEA's oversight, not once did the IAEA ever record any suspicions that its enriched uranium might be diverted for military purposes. The timing of Lavrov's remarks is inseparable from an escalating security crisis. Around the Strait of Hormuz, where U.S. forces have imposed a naval blockade targeting Iranian ports and coastal trade, the blockade has transformed a standoff over nuclear policy into a live confrontation with global economic consequences because Hormuz is a vital corridor for energy exports and commercial shipping. The American position has been framed as coercive leverage to force Tehran back to the table under stricter conditions. Iranian officials, meanwhile, have argued that pressure tactics at sea amount to collective PO, enrichment, while warning that efforts to choke off Iranian trade could spill into broader disruption across the Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Against that backdrop, diplomatic efforts have pivoted toward new venues and intermediaries, including renewed speculation about a return to negotiations in Islamabad. The atmosphere surrounding those talks has been shaped by the blockade and by the larger question of what the United States is truly seeking, a verifiable civilian program or a total dismantling of enrichment capability altogether. Lavrov's approach was to insist that realistic and lawful objectives should guide diplomacy while portraying Washington's demands as maximalist and destabilizing. He pointed to what he described as a pattern, agreements being reached then undermined by political shifts in the West, with the burden of compliance pushed disproportionately onto Iran. One of the most sensitive claims in the wider debate is whether Iran's nuclear posture has ever been fraught. Med internally as morally prohibited, Lavrov invoked Iran's religious and political narrative to reinforce Moscow's view that Tehran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon, linking it to a long-cited religious decree. He said, as you are aware, prior to the brutal assassination of the Supreme Leader Ayat Khan, at the outset of the aggression, there was his religious edict, which unequivocally forbade the development of nuclear weaponry. The larger point Moscow is making is that a state's right to pursue peaceful nuclear technology should not be treated as a privilege granted by powerful countries, but as a treaty-based entitlement so long as safeguards are applied and diversion does not occur. He said, asterisk, therefore, the right to enrich uranium for exclusively peaceful purposes is considered an inalienable and fundamental right of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Asterisk, still, the policy dispute is sharpened by the scale and sensitivity of Iran's stockpile. International estimates in recent years have pointed to a significant quantity of uranium enriched to 60% purity below weapons grade, but far above levels typically used for civilian power reactors. That enrichment level has become a central political flashpoint, with U.S. officials arguing it shortens the time Iran would need to produce weapons-grade material if it chose to do so, while Iran argues it is a bargaining chip and a hedge against against broken promises. On the American side, Vice President J.D. Vance has been one of the most prominent voices insisting that any deal must remove Iran's enriched uranium from the country and establish a verification regime robust enough to prevent weaponization. The core of Washington's argument is that enrichment inside Iran creates an inherent risk. Tehran's counter-argument is that surrendering its stockpile would strip it of both sovereignty and leverage, leaving it exposed if commitments are later abandoned. Iran has offered alternatives, including proposals to dilute or convert T material under monitored arrangements rather than transferring it abroad. Moscow has seized on that opening, suggesting Russia could again play a technical and diplomatic role, as it did during the implementation of the 2015 nuclear deal, by receiving material for storage or converting certain quantities into reactor fuel. Lavrov indicated that Moscow would respect Tehran's decisions as long as they adhere to what he described as the principle that civilian nuclear programs are legitimate under international law. In that framing, Russia is not simply defending Iran, it is challenging the idea that Washington can impose conditions that go beyond the treaty framework. Just as contentious is the question of who bears responsibility for the current escalation around Hormuz. Lavrov argued that Iran's posture in the strait should be understood as a reaction to military pressure, and he suggested that even some Gulf Arab interlocutors privately share that assessment, though few would say so publicly, given the perilous regional balance. At the same time, Russia has presented itself as ready to cushion the economic impact of disruptions, including supplying energy to partners affected by tightened maritime conditions. That offer is part practical, part political. It signals that Moscow wants to present the West pressure campaign as self-defeating, pushing markets toward alternative suppliers while deepening multipolar alignments. But Lavrov's remarks did not stop at Iran. He used the moment to widen his critique into a sweeping indictment of Western power, arguing that the United States and Europe seek to constrain other states through rules they themselves set, while reshaping global governance in ways that preserve unequal advantages. He said, certainly from an international standpoint, we are deeply concerned by the overt attempts of the West, both the United States and Europe, to restrain and in some instances even to revive it, a Germany based on the firm conviction that its 500-year-long history and experience of conquering the world and successfully bending it to its own specific interests. He linked those claims to historic exploitation, from colonialism to the slave trade, arguing that modern Western systems are being modernized rather than dismantled, and that much of the world rejects that premise. He said, the establishment of such governance mechanisms, which global governance that allows some to live at the expense of others, including the slave trade, colonialism, and many other things. The rhetorical strategy was clear. Cast the confrontation over Iran not as an isolated nuclear compliance issue, but as part of a broader contest over global order, sovereignty, and power. In Lavrov's telling, the West seeks to preserve dominance while presenting its demands as universal norms, whereas Russia and China claim to be pushing back in defense of a more plural system. He turned next to Eurasia, warning that the continent filling with hotbeds of tension, and he placed much of the blame on NATO's search for a renewed purpose and the continued militarization of Europe. Ukraine remains central to that theme, presented as the focal point of a Western-led security architecture expanding toward Russia's borders. He said, we also examine the situation in various regions with particular focus on Eurasia, where more and more hotbeds of tension are arising in Europe. This is NATO's activity regarding in its search for a new meaning for its own existence, primarily through the process of drawing Ukraine into its ranks. Asked from there, he argued that internal disagreements between Washington and European capitals are sharpening instability, even as Brussels bureaucracy drives policies that, in Moscow's view, deepen confrontation rather than reduce it. He described the Middle East and the Persian Gulf as a critical crisis point, warning that simplistic attempts to carve it up will not lead to positive outcomes. He then pivoted to an issue he insisted must not be sidelined: Palestine, specifically Gaza and the West Bank. His message was that regional diplomacy should not treat the Palestinian question as background noise, even when other conflicts dominate headlines and diplomatic bandwidth. He said, but Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank must not be left in the shadows, and they should not be pushed into the background. Lavrov also underscored that Moscow and Beijing are watching Central Asia closely, describing what he called a struggle driven by Western attempts to dictate regional relationships and domestic political choices. The language echoed familiar Russian and Chinese objections to external pressure, democracy promotion, and security cooperation initiatives that they view as encroaching on their near abroad. He said, today with the Chinese delegation, we clearly confirm this Central Asia. There, too, a rather interesting geopolitical struggle is unfolding, owing to the West's persistent attempts to establish its own rules, even here to play a dominant role in dictating how Central Asian nations should organize their daily lives and with whom they ought to forge their international relationships. Addicts. He extended that claim to the South Caucasus, suggesting the same pattern is emerging there, even if it is less overt. He then widened the map again: Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait, and the South and East China Seas, depicting a landscape where major powers are taking practical measures that are increasingly antagonistic. He said what this means is that our entire Eurasian continent, in one way or another, has become a stage for profoundly serious, mutually antagonistic tendencies and practical measures being taken by the major players within the global community. Behind all of it is a single urgent question: whether diplomacy can still produce an enforceable framework for Iran's nuclear program while preventing a regional war from widening at sea. The United States is betting that a blockade and hard demands can force Tehran into accepting limits it previously rejected. Iran is betting that endurance, leverage, and alternative partnerships can prevent capitulation. Russia and China, for their part, are using the crisis to challenge Western negotiating terms and to advertise a different model of international alignment, one where sovereignty is emphasized and the West's ability to set the rules is openly contested. For now, the outcome remains uncertain. But what is clear is that the argument over centrifuges and stockpiles has become inseparable from the wider struggle over who gets to define international law, who gets to enforce it, and what happens when power collides with principle in one of the world's most strategically sensitive waterways.